Good morning to everyone joining us in the United States, and good afternoon to those of you watching in Europe. My name is Jörn Fleck, and I'm the Senior Director of the Europe Center here at the Atlantic Council. I'd like to welcome you to this conversation with Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Gabriel Escobar on the Euro-Atlantic outlook for the Western Balkans. I'm delighted to introduce Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Escobar, who's with us here in the Atlantic Council studios today. Mr. Escobar, we're delighted to have you with us. Russia's war in Ukraine has focused minds across the West on the importance of completing the work of European integration. Washington has always played a key role in the Western Balkans in facilitating positive change, and its work has kicked into even higher gear as the war has ground on. Our guest today, Das Escobar, has been at the center of these efforts. The scope of the work has been both regional, focusing on ways to get all 6 countries closer integrated into Europe and the transatlantic community, and country-specific, addressing outstanding issues between Serbia and Kosovo, for instance, and key challenges within Bosnia and Herzegovina, to name but 2. For us at the Atlantic Council, our strategic objective has always been to highlight the great potential of the Western Balkans, to support the Euro-Atlantic future of these countries, and to keep the United States and Europe actively engaged in the region. Our Balkans Forward initiative has been focusing on making regional integration a reality and working with partners and allies to encourage a full European future for all 6 countries in the Balkans. We're thrilled to have Deputy Assistant Secretary Escobar with us here today, not just to get a sense of the Biden administration's priorities in the region, but also to get a sense of the broader vision for the future that is driving Washington's Balkans agenda. I'm also delighted to introduce Ilvar Tare, our very own non-resident senior fellow who will moderate today's discussion and run the show. But first, over to you, Mr. Escobar, for some opening remarks.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for this opportunity. I want to start just by framing the approach that this administration has to the Western Balkans. Despite the crisis in Ukraine and despite the challenges that we see in the region, from our perspective, the Western Balkans are still an area of tremendous opportunity. We have positive relationships with all 6 countries, and we want to develop those relationships. Now, the challenge is, for both the United States and for our European allies, is that those countries don't have positive relations all with each other. So that has been the challenge, is to find durable solutions and sustainable relationships between those countries so that Europe can be complete. I also want to emphasize that from our perspective, these countries are already part of the Euro-Atlantic family. They're just not part of the formal structures that bind the United States and Europe. So the question is, how do we accelerate their membership in those formal institutions while recognizing that they are European, that they do belong within our societies, that they do belong in our structures? So that's another challenge, is how do we accelerate the integration of those countries into the transatlantic partnership, into the European Union, and to other structures that have made Europe such a successful place and have made the partnership between the United States and Europe one of the most durable and important relationships in the world. So I want to start from there and then really talk about the challenges. But I would say that the opportunities that are offered in the Western Balkans far outweigh the risks that the Western Balkans pose for the Euro-Atlantic community. So I'll stop there. And Ilva, thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you, Mr. Escobar, for coming here. Welcome to the Atlantic Council. Thank you for those remarks. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. There is a lot to talk about.
There is.
We have a very big audience here in person and online, more than 400 people joining us from around the world virtually. We have a few questions lined up for you via video towards the end of our session. But for the rest of you that are joining us online via Zoom or on YouTube, you can ask your question by using the function, the chat function, to pose your question. And I'll try towards the end of this event to work on them and probably answer some of them time permitting. Let's start with the big picture and then move on to more specific issues like Serbia and Kosovo. As you said, Mr. Escobar, it feels like Russia's aggression in Ukraine has changed the game in the region. As the old Chinese proverb goes, where there is a crisis, there is an opportunity. Do you feel like the West is seizing this opportunity well to promote positive change in the region?
I do. I mean, honestly, I think from our European allies, there's an increased urgency in fixing some of the problems and speeding up some of the processes that are going to move the region in the right direction. And so in that regard, the crisis in Ukraine has helped focus on the realities of what is happening in the Western Balkans. So rather than the Western Balkans being forgotten by policymakers, we have a renewed emphasis on fixing some of the problems in the region.
And there is willingness from the region itself to do that?
Well, I mean, part of the problem in the region is that even though the crisis in Ukraine has created tensions, the problems of the Balkans are homegrown. They've always been there. So there's always been a resistance by some figures within the structures to resist integration, to resist the rule of law reforms that are necessary, to resist the difficult political decisions that have to be made for the region to move forward. So I would say that the problems have always been there. They're just a little bit more urgent now.
How worried are you about Russia's ability to destabilize the region as the war goes on in Ukraine?
Well, look, any intelligent observer and analyst will realize that in the future, Russia will not be a credible partner, that Putin will not be a respected figure in the world, so that betting on that relationship is a losing bet. So I think that you're seeing at least some very intelligent people pivot away from that relationship. Now, that's not to say that Russia isn't working very desperately to keep some of the players in the Western Balkans within their orbit. But it's really economically, politically, and geographically, they're in a losing battle.
The issue is, what is U.S. doing to cut those ties from Russia within the Western Balkan countries? Are you doing something about it?
Well, look, I think cutting the ties is the wrong way to look at it. What we're doing is we're strengthening the ties between the community of democratic countries, which, by the way, are also the most prosperous countries in the world, and those regions. And by doing so, a lot of the countries are recognizing that they don't need to rely on Russia.
I'll have more questions on that, more specific, especially when we talk about Serbia. Before going that, it has long been U.S. policy that the region's future is Europe, is the European Union. Is the enlargement process healthy, in your opinion? Is there a clear path to full membership for the 6 countries?
I think there's no other option. I mean, every country that's joined the European Union, and I say this repeatedly, every member of the European Union that's come in is more democratic, more stable, more prosperous, and contributes to the overall stability of the continent. Additionally, the process provides development in a way that dwarfs any bilateral assistance that anybody could give them. So that has to be the ultimate goal for all of them. Now, I also believe that the region, the countries of the region, are already European. They're culturally European, they're historically European, and increasingly they're economically European. So yes, I do believe that European integration has to be the highest aspiration. That said, I would like to see the process move faster. I would like to see more Europe in the Western Balkans, either by allowing them a seat at the table where they close chapters and more participation in European structures, maybe as observers, maybe as entrant candidates. But we definitely need more Europe in the region, and we definitely need more America in the region.
Yes, I agree with that. More America is necessary. It's actually very welcomed in the region. But what you said, there are many doors. Actually, there are vetoes too, like in the case of North Macedonia. And they still have some obstacles, and they have to change the constitution as requested by Bulgaria. How optimistic are you about North Macedonia's accession talks starts?
Look, I'm very optimistic. If you look at how North Macedonia has handled their candidacy, it's been a model for the region. First of all, I always point out that in the region where we have challenges in and multi-ethnic relations and multi-ethnic governance, North Macedonia stands out as a really good example of a multi-ethnic civic state. And it serves as a good example for other countries that are struggling with the same problem. Additionally, they have done all of the reforms that were necessary to open the first door. So I do believe that this government has the will, that the people of North Macedonia have the capacity to do what they need to do to be a full member of Europe. And I also say about North Macedonia that our relationship with Macedonia through NATO, they've been a great ally. Both bilaterally and within NATO. And that's what Europe can expect from them. They will be a good partner. They will be a committed partner. And they will be one that will provide benefits for the European Union as well.
And I think we all agree that the process should be faster and the speed should definitely change. Do you share these concerns with your EU partners?
Not only do I share it with my EU partners, some of my EU partners share those concerns with me. So there are many countries that believe that the process should be faster.
So who is creating the problems then?
Well, look,
looks like we're talking to each other with no answers.
I mean, I understand that, inside of the European Union, we forget that there's also domestic concerns. There's also internal concerns. There are voters who do worry about what enlargement would do for them. And I think that's a job for all of us to convince them that the European Union will be stronger, will be more prosperous with these countries. These countries are already contributing a lot. They're the fastest growing region in Europe. They will be drivers of economic growth and jobs in the future.
Meanwhile, Germany has been very active. They revitalized the Berlin Process Summit last month. Chancellor Scholz and Foreign Minister Baerbock personally were very engaged. This has been followed up with the EU Western Balkans Summit in Tirana next week. What are your expectations out of this activity?
Well, look, I really welcome this renewed European energy. The Berlin process is absolutely critical. It's critical to create a common space, common standards, a common vision for the region. So anything that creates integration within the region and cooperation among the governments of the region, we welcome. So they recently signed 3 agreements in Berlin. I think we're going to talk about that. And I definitely, we need to see a way forward and the full implementation, not just of the actual agreements, but the spirit of the agreements about cooperation and integration.
We will talk about that in a bit with our live questions. Meanwhile, European partners, especially the front lines states to the war in Ukraine, are increasingly agitated about Serbia's not fully aligning itself with the European foreign policy priorities on Russia. How do you see the situation?
We'd like to see closer alignment with the European Union as well. And by the way, it's a legally binding obligation for them under their accession process. Now, Serbia has gone a long way in its relationship with Europe, and especially in its relationship with the United States. I personally have encouraged Serbia to impose sanctions, to align more closely, and to be more demonstrative of its alignment with the values that Europe has. I can say that we've had a partial success. I mean, Serbia has voted against Russia in every opportunity in the UN, in the EBRD, in the Human Rights Council. Those votes are actually more than just symbolic, they're important. So they've also supported some of the humanitarian efforts that we've worked on in trying to get, allowing Ukrainian refugees to leave the war zone and contributing to the humanitarian situation. We'd like them to do more, and we'll continue that conversation.
The European Council, since we are talking about conversation, is deliberating on giving Bosnia's candidacy status finally, something that most observers would call it a symbolic gesture, given the lack of programs of reforms there. Do you think such a symbolic gesture would be wise, nevertheless?
I think that any signal that these countries are welcome in Europe is important, especially right now. So yeah, we agree with it. But we think at the same time, however, that it should be more than just symbolic, that there should be a movement. And by the way, this is not just a task for Europe. It is predominantly a task for the political leaders of Bosnia and Herzegovina to make that dream a reality. And right now, in many cases, I don't see that among the leadership in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
There was another controversy with the decision of the High Representative in Sarajevo. What are the next steps? What is your comment on that decision, and what are the next steps to be followed?
Yeah, we welcome it. We support it. The High Representative has an independent mandate to make sure that Dayton is properly implemented, and he's doing that, and he's doing that properly. Now, he has assured the international community that he will not. His intention is not to create a state through the use of bomb powers, that he'll use them when absolutely necessary.
Is there a risk that it will create?
I don't think so. And if you look at the last 3 decisions that he's made, now, it's quite likely that we wouldn't have had elections if he hadn't have imposed a requirement for financing those elections. He had to do it. The leaders didn't do it. The electoral transparency decision that he implemented allowed the state to figure out how much irregularities there were in the electoral process. Now, that was really important. And it's important that the elections be seen as credible. I'm not sure that we're there yet, but his decision helped strengthen that. And the last decision on expanding the representation in the House of Peoples actually created more space for different parties to participate in the governance of the country. So we support it all. And he still has a mandate that's very important, and we will continue to support him.
In the run-up of the Bosnia elections, all eyes were on what would happen next for Bosnia, and it was seen like the biggest problem in the Western Balkans. But things changed quickly, and in Balkans fashion, we now have a Montenegro problem, which went from the front runner to politically stalled.
That's right.
What are your concerns about the situation there?
Well, I'm very concerned about the fact that Montenegro has lost a lot of time in passing the reforms that are necessary for closing chapters. They've opened all of the chapters. Now it's a question of closing them. So we were hoping that Montenegro would continue its pace of being one of the front runners in the membership process. Now the challenge, as you've pointed out, is that we're in a very deep constitutional crisis, where there are some parties that are pushing to change the law on the presidency without even having a quorum in the Constitutional Court, so that if anyone challenges that change to the Constitution, there's not a body that can decide whether that was done properly or not. So we need to focus on 2 things. One is they need to fill those positions urgently, and not play games with trying to extract political concessions to do that. And the second, quite honestly, I think that this government needs a renewed public mandate. That means early elections.
Elections.
We need early elections.
For which the constitutional decision is needed.
That's right.
And the numbers are not there.
Right, right. So that's how we see it. And we need to do that urgently. And then afterwards, they need to refocus on things that matter to people. That is the rule of law reforms, the fight against corruption, the economy, and not things that create divisions, like trying to figure out who's a Serb and who's a Montenegrin and whether in which church they attend. Those things are really efforts to further destabilize the country.
Have you shared these concerns with politicians there?
We've shared it privately, and this is the first time that I'm sharing it publicly.
And you hope things will change?
Well, we're gonna work to hope we're going to work to make those things
to make
change.
that happen.
Yeah.
You mentioned corruption, which indeed I had a question for that.
Yes.
Remains a threat for the region.
For the whole
a threat
region.
for it undermines democracy, which is already fragile in that region. What will the U.S. take additional steps to sanction corrupt officials in the region?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's an important tool. It's been effective. I mean, not only has it been effective to sanction the individuals, but if you look at some of the narrative that Treasury puts out along with the decision, you'll see the depth of the corruption. You'll see what some of these people are doing. That there are politicians and there are figures in Bosnia and Herzegovina, for example, that were actively coordinating and cooperating with organized criminal groups. And the people need to know that. And once people know that, the leaders have to take action. They have to remove these people from positions of responsibility. They have to remove these people from party lists. And that it goes for all of the countries of the region.
So you do believe that the sanctions policy is working in the region?
Well, I think it's an important tool in addressing corruption. Now, the other part, which is more difficult and much more long-term, but much more sustainable, is that we have to pressure these leaders to do the rule of law reforms that are required to join the European Union. Those have been successful in all of the new entrants, and it's a good recipe.
Meanwhile, the situation in the region, and you are a frequent traveler there for your work, is a bit gloomy. There is new waves of immigration, and the current population in the Western Balkans is estimated to be 16 million. U.S. investments are still limited. What are the barriers preventing American businesses to invest in the region?
Well, to start with, corruption. So, corruption is the biggest problem for the region. And the nationalism and the ethnic rivalry is really just a mask for that. It is very clear that all of the parties that are the most nationalist parties in the region are also the most corrupt. And that is a fact. And that is not the U.S. government talking. That is independent organizations like Transparency International and some of our European civil society organizations that point that out repeatedly. And including some very, very good domestic civil society organizations. So that's one. The other is the economy of scale. So it's difficult for a company to enter a market of 2-3 million and then have to do the same registration in another country for a very, very small population. So that's another reason why I believe that economic integration is important, because it actually increases the attractiveness of the region.
So there will not be American businesses until corruption is under control?
No, there will be, but there will be more if they control the corruption.
Okay, because I have many questions. I want
Sure.
to continue. Albania has undergone unprecedented justice reform in the recent years. And the results, while initially encouraging, seems to appear to have been stalled lately. Do you have any reservations about the rule of law and the new judiciary body in Albania?
I mean, Albania has done an awful lot in the last 20, 30 years. I mean, you have to understand that the image that Albania had in the early 90s was not a very good one. And now they're among our most valued transatlantic partners. So they did that. We didn't do that. We didn't create that. They created that through their own vision, their own aspirations to be a much more credible partner. So yeah, occasionally there are missteps. But the history of, the modern history of Albania is they can make the reforms. They can take the tough political decisions. So I'm counting on the leadership of Albania to continue that trend. And I think they will.
Finally, let's turn to Serbia and Kosovo, the source of the highest tension in the region lately. Do you think that the current solution with U.S. Intermediary there on the license plates decreased the potential conflict between the two countries?
Well, I think that the agreement that we reached last week was important in reducing the tensions. So it has always been our position that rather than deal with these individual issues that create immediate tension, that all of them should be focused, should be folded into the EU facilitated dialogue. And again, this dialogue should be European, mostly because the aspiration for both countries is to join the European Union. They are in Europe. They're surrounded by European Union countries. But,
and should have the trust of both parties.
That's right.
In the
That's
European
right.
Union, which
Right.
seems to be...
Well, I mean, yeah, we'll build it.
Yeah.
We'll build that trust. But this EU facilitated dialogue has a very, very strong involvement of the American side. So we work very closely with our European partners in crafting solutions that we hope will work for both sides, that will work in a European fashion, that will integrate both sides, that will create opportunities for them to move forward in their European integration path and to create economic opportunities for the region as well.
Is there any chance that the U.S. may take a lead on that?
I don't think so. Because right now, I think if you look at the history of our engagement in the last 2 years, working with the European unions through their facilitation, we've managed to resolve many of the crises, and we've managed to prevent violence in the region over the last 18 months.
Earlier this year, you urged Belgrade to shift away from the narrative that Kosovo is Serbia and to move forward the narrative Kosovo and Serbia are Europe.
Yes.
Which I found that was beautifully said.
And it's factually true.
It is true too. But how do you believe President Vučić has responded to that call to action?
Well, the Serbian government has stated repeatedly that their own strategic goals are twofold. One is to join the European Union. Now, we can argue about whether they're making enough progress in that path. And the other is regional integration. So we believe in both of those goals. Now, the question is, how do we create something European, something transatlantic out of that? And I do believe that the economic potential of the region will create the opportunities for integration. And by the way, when we talk about economic integration, all of the chambers of commerce of the region would like to see closer integration. So the economy is likely to be one of the selling points for any agreement between the two countries.
Mr. Escobar, I'm struck in following the mood in Kosovo that much of the population, even outside the Prime Minister's Kurtis base, are increasingly frustrated with the West, saying that the policy is to appease Belgrade and pile on undue pressure on Pristina. Are you concerned about this turn in public opinion?
Well, I hope it's temporary because, our friends in Pristina constantly tell us that there is no more pro-American country than Kosovo. There is no more pro-Kosovan country in the world than the United States. And our commitment to Kosovo, to their sovereignty, their independence, their territorial integrity, and their security is firm. And it doesn't go through one person, it doesn't go through one party. It goes with, that partnership is with the people of the country, and we will not abandon them. So if we have tactical differences in the approach on how to get the country to move forward in its transatlantic path, people should see them as tactical differences and not a change in the American attitude toward the country.
Okay, so it's a tactical difference, not appeasement towards Belgrade.
Well, I don't know what...
How would you respond to
I
those
don't
critics?
understand why people would say that encouraging Kosovo to have a stable, predictable, and peaceful relationship with their biggest neighbor is appeasement. So I think that's a tactical difference that we have.
And in that regard, talking about Pristina, do you think the government is committed to implementing the Association of Serbs municipality?
Well, it's a legally binding obligation. So it's legally binding on Serbia, on Kosovo, on the European Union, and because we support the dialogue, it's a commitment for us. So yes, it should be implemented. In fact, it will be implemented. So I think that the government in Pristina should see that as an opportunity. There are models in Europe about that provide collective rights for minorities already within the European Union. And if you look at this, there is a way to create opportunities for both countries. Now, if we don't deal with the question of the association, this population of 70,000 people living in northern Kosovo is the real challenge. They are at the center of all of the tension, of all of the conflict, of all of the confrontations. So we have to look for models and ways that are going to work for them. They are dual citizens. They should get granted all of the protection of the institutions in Kosovo, but they also should be permitted to participate in the social, political, and economic life of Serbia. So there is an opportunity there. That's why I say that they should look at it as both of them being European. So if we don't solve this question, we're going to be in a perpetual cycle of crisis.
Is there a deadline for the issue to be solved?
As soon as possible. As soon as possible. I mean, I think it doesn't help anybody to have a frozen conflict in the region. And this is the only frozen conflict in Central Europe.
We have to go through questions. Thank you very much for this part. I still have many questions, but I want to honor our guests too. I'll turn to some questions via video. First, we have our very own Atlantic Council's fellow, Maya from Belgrade. Maya, please introduce yourself fully and ask the question.
Oh, hello, everyone, and thank you, Ilva, and thank you, Gabe, so much for being with us today and for everything you're doing for this region. It's really, really important, and we are grateful for that. My name is Maya Pišević, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, and I wanted to shift your attention a little bit to the lighter themes, as they say, or that there should be. Regional economic cooperation, regional integration. You are really a big proponent of the economic integration in the Balkans and including the open Balkans. And I wanted to ask you to give us your view of this particular moment in light of the three newer developments in this regard. One is the ambitiously launched Berlin process, which you mentioned a few minutes ago, with three important agreements signed. Yes, it depends a lot on the implementation, but still, this is the first time that the three agreements were signed by all six members. The second one is, and that's not a new one, unfortunately, is Kosovo's, or rather Prime Minister Kurti's reluctance to join the open Balkan, at least to test it, as he was invited so many times. And the third is somewhat surprising report that came out of Montenegro's Ministry for European Relations, criticizing open Balkans in a way for being non-transparent initiative by three charismatic leaders, which we probably agree that they are. But still, this is not encouraging in light of the expectation that Montenegro will be the next country to join the open Balkans. So I wanted to hear your view on the uniqueness of the open Balkans and also why do you see, what's the raison d'etre for its existing and pushing forward in the coming period? Thank you so much.
Well, look, I want to clarify that we do support the Open Balkans Initiative, but only in the way that we support all regional economic integration initiatives. So the region will be stronger, more attractive, and more dynamic if it integrates. It will be a leader in renewable energy, in LNG, in shipping, transportation, even tourism. And so that market of now, the estimates are between 16 and 22 million people in the region, and a combined market of $125 billion, which was before the current global slowdown, growing at 7% per year, which is about 3 times the rate of continental Europe. That's a phenomenal accomplishment. And so I think whether it's Berlin or Common Regional Market or Open Balkans, anything that brings the countries closer together, that reduces trade barriers, should be supported. Now, on the Open Balkans, we've said we support it only under 2 conditions. One is that it's open to everybody, and it's open to everybody as a full member. Now, one of the challenges of CRM and RCC and others is that they put caveats on Kosovo's membership. There should be none. They should be a full member of all institutions. So that's one of the things that is interesting, and I think we should test it. We should test President Vucic's commitment to bring Kosovo in as a full member and to recognize their government-issued documents. So that's an interesting aspect of the Open Balkans. But if only 3 or 4 join initially, what it does is it requires the difference between a free trade unit and a free smuggling zone is the control of the borders. So that means that they would have to recognize borders between Serbia and Republika Srpska and between Serbia and Northern Kosovo as international borders regulated by Serbia plus 3 NATO members. So in any way you look at it, there are opportunities for the region to move forward to heal a little bit through the Open Balkans if it's properly executed.
Maya, I have to move on. If you don't have a follow-up question, I have to move on with other questions with Agon. Before going there, I want to remind our in-person audience here that if you have a question, raise your hand and an iPad will be given to you to ask your question. Agon from Tirana, it's your turn.
Thank you, Ilva, for this excellent conversation. Agon Malici, policy analyst and civil society activist from Kosovo. Mr. Escobar, the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue is entering a new and potentially very dynamic phase with this new French-German proposal. Prime Minister Kurti has recently called it a good base for discussion and has hinted at a 2 or 3 month timeline for an agreement to be reached. Now, in Kosovo, there are a lot of issues of concern about the agreement, particularly on the powers of the ASM, but I would like to just ask you your take on the issue of the non-recognizers, who are an obstacle for Kosovo to advance in EU and NATO accession. And without whose recognition, Kosovo has very little or no incentive to sign any agreement with Serbia. These non-recognizers, they cannot be a signatory in any agreement, but is there any ongoing discussion with them or any parallel process to guarantee their recognition? And generally, what role do you see the US playing in sort of making sure that Kosovo has an open path to NATO, especially considering the US's role and weight in NATO?
Well, we do have constant and frequent discussions with the non-recognizers about how we can help them move forward in the recognition process. Now, Kosovo is an independent, sovereign country. The question is not about their status, it's about the recognition that that status exists. And most of the governments, in one way, shape, or another, acknowledge that. And there is pressure, especially economic pressure, for some of the others to start looking at this region, and they cannot fully engage economically in the region if they don't recognize all of them equally. So I think that creating a European path that the 2 countries follow to create a mutual, a binding mutual agreement on their relationship will definitely open the door to more recognitions. Now, I do believe that even if we don't get all 5, that there won't be any blockage to Kosovo joining institutions like PFP, eventually NATO, Council of Europe, and all of the other structures that it deserves to be in. So I do think it is a new dynamic. I do think both countries should take advantage of it.
Thank you, Agon. We have another question from Jovana from Kosovo. Jovana, floor is yours.
Hello, I'm Jovana Radosavljević from New Social Initiative based in North Kosovo. Mr. Escobar, the trust between Kosovo Serbs especially in the north, and Kosovo government has been broken beyond repair, and it doesn't really seem that we're anywhere close to fixing that. And the problem is that the trust is gone on both sides. In addition to that, we have people that have left the institutions established within the Brussels dialogue, and that there is no will from the citizens to return, let alone the will from the Kosovo government to take them back. Additionally, the relations between Aleksandar Vučić and Albin Kurti are very bad and very destructive for the dialogue. I cannot say that there is a much better situation with the relations of the government of Kosovo and the EU. And in all of these circumstances, the given conditions really don't say that the upcoming elections for mayors would be successful, and let us know that we can actually expect the establishment of the Association of Serb Majority Municipalities. So from the ground here, the situation looks very grim, and that there is no way out. But what do you think? Is there?
I think there is. I think we need to give both sides a reason to hope. I do think that there are a lot of opportunities for engagement. Now, it is true that there is a lack of trust between the two communities, but there's also been a very serious lack of vision. And by the way, there is no option to a peaceful coexistence between ethnic Albanians and ethnic Serbs in the region. And it is important for them, and it is a sign of maturity that if they will be able to solve their problems peacefully. Because if I frequently say that what we're trying to do is push the region into a union where they're going to have to live with Norwegians and Czechs and French. And if you can't live with your neighbor, then it's very difficult to show Europe that you are capable of being part of that community. So there's no option. And the future of the region is as multi-ethnic democracies. So they have to find a way to bridge the trust. And that's on all leaders. That's on the municipal leaders, that's on the central government. But we also have to give them some options, some ideas, some thoughts as to how the relationship between peoples in the region are actually a very, very attractive aspect of the region. That's why the region is so beautiful, so rich, so culturally vibrant, is because of all of the different ethnicities that inhabit it. So it's a question of creating the peace. And as I've said, the United States has a good relationship with all of the countries. The challenge is they don't have good relationships with each other. So I think we'd like to show more leadership in trying to foster that trust.
And now we have our senior fellow, Damir Marušić, here from Washington, D.C. Damir.
Thank you, Ilva. Thank you, Mr. Escobar. My name is Damir Marušić. I'm senior fellow here at the Europe Center here in Washington. As you might know, one of the other initiatives that we busy ourselves with here at the Atlantic Council is the 3 Cs initiative, which we think plays a key role in fostering forward-leaning approaches to European integration. Last summer, President Zelensky signaled that Ukraine would like to become a full member of the 3 Cs initiatives. And at the June 2023 Riga summit, the 3 Cs countries extended to Ukraine a partnership relationship. I guess my question is somewhat building on what Maya was getting at, and just to get a sense of how the United States is thinking about this. Given where enlargement is, and given the kind of creativity that seems to be necessary from initiatives, like the Berlin process, but also the European political community, do you think that there's any wisdom that some kind of membership, kind of like what has been extended to Ukraine, should also be extended to the other states of the Western Balkans? Is there a U.S. government position on this as a partner of the initiative and one that is committed to invest $300 million into the 3 Cs Initiative Investment Fund? Thank you.
Well, look, as I stated at the beginning, we see the countries of the Western Balkans as already part of our family. So the question is, how do you intensify their membership in the formal structures and increase the integration with existing structures? So yes, I would welcome anything that brings the region closer structurally, legislatively, and in a regulatory fashion, closer to the European common market. That's where they need to be. That's where their future lies. So yes, we would support it. Now, we haven't formally worked to create those structures, but I could see it happening. And there would be absolutely no, from our perspective, we don't want to see any closed doors for any country of the Western Balkans to participate in anything that makes Europe a better place.
Thank you, Mr. Escobar. I have many questions from the online audience.
Sure.
I think we're running out of time, but just out of respect for all our audience, I would ask briefly at least two questions. One is from Mila Đurđević, Radio Free Europe, Balkan Service journalist. She says, Serbia claims that it will never recognize Kosovo, while for Kosovo, mutual recognition appears to be the prior condition to negotiate about any other issue. Where do you see the solution?
Well, look, I do think that we have to start from the fact that that the two countries need a stable and peaceful relationship. That's where we have to start, and then we have to build the structures that create the trust between the two countries. Then we have to start working on the recognition of the fact that they are two populations with two different orientations, with two different aspirations. And it's unlikely, if you're a Serb who believes that Kosovo is part of Serbia, that anybody else in Europe will believe that as well. So at some point, when Serbia joins the European Union, it will have to come to peace with the reality that Kosovo is no longer part of Serbia. Now, that doesn't mean that Kosovo and Serbia cannot have a productive and constructive and peaceful voice across each other's borders. That is, to engage communities that are culturally similar, or to engage business groups that are doing cross-border trade, or that they would work together on environment, on other regional initiatives. Mm-hmm. So it will happen. It will happen that Kosovo and Serbia will have a peaceful relationship, and it will happen that it will be done through transatlantic channels, and that the region will prosper. We just have to get people to understand that.
I have a final question from Mr. Lazar Semini from Associated Press in Albania. Kosovo Prime Minister says that there was a form of deadline next spring at the French-German recent plan, which Belgrade has refused, he's asking. Is there any chance to have a deal based on that plan, or both countries are just playing with smaller items instead? Have you read that plan?
I have.
And what do you think of it?
I think it offers tremendous opportunities for creating a stable relationship between the two countries.
Is it realistic?
I think it's very realistic.
Can it be done by next spring as a deadline?
Well, whether it can be done by next spring depends on the pace of negotiations and the pace of meetings, which is not dependent on the U.S., but it's dependent on the Europeans. But I think that we can start to see the skeleton of an agreement emerge next year. And I'd like to see that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Escobar, for taking the time to this wide-ranging and in-depth interview and conversation. As we work with the Western Balkans, we know very well that continuing American engagement in the region is absolutely necessary for any progress in that region. We are lucky to have you, someone like you, inside the Biden administration, working every day on getting the agenda of the region on top of already busy Europe agenda for the US. And thank you also for joining us here in person and online to the audience. Please follow the Atlantic Council's Europe Center at AC Europe, and keep up with our work, especially following Balkans Forward initiative. Thank you.